Hey there, plant lovers. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to channel for everything about gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces, both indoors and outdoors. Today I want to talk about something that's been blowing my mind lately, and I think it's going to surprise you too. We're diving into the world of a plant that most people literally pull out of their gardens and toss in the trash. Yet it contains more omega-3 fatty acids than salmon. Yes, you heard that right. More than salmon. And yet the world still calls it a weed. I'm talking about purslane, and trust me, by the end of this story, you're going to look at those weeds in your garden completely differently. I first stumbled upon purslane's secret about 3 years ago when my neighbour Daisy mentioned she'd been eating it in salads. I remember thinking she was joking because I'd spent hours pulling this stuff out of my vegetable beds, cursing it for growing so stubbornly between my tomatoes and peppers. But Daisy insisted I try it, and she told me about the omega-3 content. I didn't believe her at first, so I did some digging, and what I found completely changed my perspective. This little succulent plant, with its rounded leaves and reddish stems, contains about 300 to 400 milligrams of alpha-linolenic acid per 100 grams of fresh leaves. That's significantly higher than most leafy greens, and in some cases, it rivals or exceeds the omega-3 content you'd find in certain fish when you compare gram for gram of the usable plant material. Now, before we go further, let me paint you a picture of what purslane actually looks like, because I know a lot of you probably have it growing in your yards right now without realizing it. Purslane, scientifically called Portulaca oleracea, is a low-growing plant with thick, paddle-shaped leaves that have a slightly rubbery texture. The stems are often tinged with red or purple, and they spread out in a mat-like fashion across the ground. It has tiny yellow flowers that open in the morning sun, and the whole plant has this refreshing, slightly lemony, slightly peppery taste. It's actually quite pleasant when you get past the mental block of thinking it's just a weed. The leaves are succulent, meaning they store water, which makes them crisp and juicy when you bite into them. What fascinates me most about purslane is how it ended up with this terrible reputation. See, throughout history, purslane was actually cultivated and eaten in many cultures. Ancient Greeks and Romans consumed it regularly. It was popular in Middle Eastern cuisine, used in Mexican cooking, and even appeared in traditional Chinese medicine. Somewhere along the line, particularly in Western countries during the rise of industrial agriculture and manicured lawns, purslane became classified as an undesirable weed. It grows easily, spreads quickly, and doesn't fit the aesthetic of a perfectly groomed garden. So people started treating it as the enemy, spraying it with herbicides and yanking it out by the roots. But here's the irony. While we were spending billions on supplements and importing expensive superfoods from around the world, we were literally throwing away one of the most nutritious plants on the planet. Let me share a quick story that really drives this home. My friend Oliver runs a small organic farm about an hour from where I live, and he used to wage war against purslane every summer. He'd spend hours weeding it out, only to have it pop back up within days. One season, he was complaining about it to a visiting chef from a high-end restaurant, and the chef's eyes lit up. The chef offered to buy all the purslane Oliver could harvest at premium prices because it was in demand among health-conscious diners. Oliver couldn't believe it. He'd been composting what was essentially a cash crop. Now he actually cultivates purslane intentionally, and it's become one of his most profitable items. That shift in perspective from weed to valuable crop is something I think we all need to embrace. If this guide has helped you, write one in the comments. And if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now let's talk about why omega-3s are such a big deal and why purslane's omega-3 content is so remarkable. Omega-3 fatty acids are essential nutrients that our bodies can't produce on their own, so we have to get them from food. They're crucial for brain health, reducing inflammation, supporting heart health, and maintaining healthy cell membranes throughout the body. The most talked about omega-3s are EPA and DHA, which come primarily from fish and marine sources. But there's also ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, which is found in plant sources. Our bodies can convert some ALA into EPA and DHA, though not super efficiently. Still, getting ALA from plants is valuable, especially for people who don't eat fish or who want to diversify their omega-3 sources. Most leafy greens contain trace amounts of omega-3s, but purslane is an absolute outlier. It contains about 5 times more omega-3s than spinach, and it's one of the richest plant-based sources you can find growing freely in most temperate climates. What's even more interesting is that purslane also contains other beneficial compounds like vitamins A, C, and E, magnesium, potassium, calcium, and various antioxidants, including betalains and glutathione. It's basically a multivitamin that grows for free in your backyard. The leaves have this great texture that holds up well in cooking, and because they're succulent, they add a nice moisture to dishes without making things soggy. I started incorporating purslane into my diet regularly, and I've found so many ways to use it. The simplest method is just tossing it into salads. The young leaves and tender stems are perfect raw, and they add this refreshing crunch that's really pleasant. I like mixing it with other greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, and a simple olive oil and lemon dressing. The lemony taste of purslane complements citrus-based dressings beautifully. You can also sauté purslane just like you would spinach. I heat up a pan with a little olive oil or butter, throw in some garlic, add the purslane and cook it for just a few minutes until it wilts. It reduces down quite a bit, similar to spinach, so you'll want to start with a generous amount. Another favourite way I use purslane is in smoothies. I know that might sound weird, but hear me out, because purslane has a mild flavour and those succulent leaves blend up really smoothly. It's actually perfect for green smoothies. I'll combine a handful of purslane with banana, berries, a bit of Greek yogurt or plant-based milk, maybe a spoonful of nut butter, and blend it all up. You get all those omega-3s and nutrients without any bitter or grassy taste that sometimes comes with other greens. My friend Rose, who's big into juicing, also adds purslane to her vegetable juice blends, and she swears it's made a difference in her skin and energy levels. For those of you who like to preserve food, purslane can be pickled, and it's actually fantastic that way. The thick leaves hold up well to the pickling process, and the tangy, crunchy result makes a great addition to sandwiches or as a side dish. I've also seen it used in stir-fries, omelettes, soups, and even as a topping for pizza. In Mexican cuisine, there's a traditional dish called verdolagas, where purslane is cooked with tomatillos, pork, and spices. It's hearty, nutritious, and absolutely delicious. The point is, this plant is incredibly versatile, and once you start thinking of it as food, rather than a weed, you'll find endless ways to use it. Now let's talk about growing purslane intentionally, because once you realize its value, you might actually want to encourage it rather than fight it. Purslane is one of the easiest plants to grow. It thrives in hot weather, loves full sun, and is incredibly drought-tolerant once established. It's a warm season annual, which means it grows during the summer months and dies back when frost arrives. In many gardens, it will self-seed and come back year after year without any effort on your part. But if you want to cultivate it more deliberately, you can either let the wild purslane in your garden flourish, or you can purchase seeds of cultivated varieties, which often have larger leaves and more upright growth habits. To grow purslane, you need very little. It prefers well-drained soil and doesn't require rich, fertile conditions. In fact, it often grows better in poorer soils where other plants struggle. You can direct sow seeds after the last frost date when the soil has warmed up. Just scatter them on the surface and press them lightly into the soil, as they need light to germinate. Within a week or two, you'll see tiny seedlings emerging. Once they're established, purslane needs minimal care. Water occasionally during extended dry periods, but don't overwater, as the succulent leaves store moisture and the plant can handle drought remarkably well. One thing I've learned from my neighbour Ivy, who's an experienced gardener, is that purslane makes an excellent living mulch. She intentionally lets it grow between her larger vegetable plants because it shades the soil, retains moisture, suppresses other more aggressive weeds, and provides a continuous harvest of greens throughout the summer. When she's ready to harvest, she simply snips off the tender top portions and the plant continues to grow and spread. It's a win-win situation. The purslane protects the soil and provides food, while also creating habitat for beneficial insects. I've noticed that ground beetles and other predatory insects often hang out in the purslane patches, and they help keep pest populations down in the garden. Harvesting purslane is incredibly easy and forgiving. You can start harvesting once the plants are about 4 to 6 inches tall. Just pinch or cut off the top few inches of stems and leaves, leaving the lower portion of the plant intact so it can regrow. Purslane responds really well to regular harvesting, and it will keep producing new growth throughout the warm season. In fact, the more you harvest, the bushier and more productive the plants become. It's one of those rare situations where harvesting actually encourages more growth. You can harvest in the morning after the dew has dried for the crispest leaves, or really any time during the day. I want to address a common concern that comes up when people talk about foraging or eating plants from their gardens: safety and identification. It's crucial to make absolutely sure you're harvesting the right plant. True purslane, Portulaca oleracea, is safe and edible. However, there's a plant called spurge that can sometimes be confused with purslane by beginners. Spurge has a milky white sap that comes out when you break the stem, while purslane has clear sap. Spurge is not edible and can cause skin irritation, so always check for that milky sap, and if you see it, that's not purslane. Another way to distinguish them is by the leaves. Purslane leaves are thick and succulent, while spurge leaves are thinner and not as fleshy. When in doubt, consult a good plant identification guide or an experienced forager in your area. Also, if you're harvesting purslane from your yard or a public space, make sure the area hasn't been treated with pesticides, herbicides, or other chemicals. Never harvest from roadsides where there might be contamination from vehicle exhaust and runoff. Stick to organic gardens, untreated areas, or grow your own so you know exactly what's going into your body. I always wash my purslane thoroughly before eating it, even when it comes from my own garden, just to remove any dirt, insects, or debris that might be clinging to the leaves. Let me tell you about Lucas, a friend who got into foraging a few years back. He started paying attention to the wild edibles growing around his neighborhood, and purslane was one of the first plants he learned to identify and harvest. He told me that discovering purslane completely shifted his mindset about weeds and waste. He realized that so much of what we consider undesirable or worthless is actually valuable if we just change our perspective. Lucas now teaches foraging classes in his community, and purslane is always one of the star plants he introduces to beginners because it's so easy to identify, abundant, and incredibly nutritious. He's helped dozens of people start seeing their yards as food sources rather than just decorative spaces that need constant maintenance. There's also an interesting environmental angle to consider here. Purslane is a climate-resilient plant. As our summers get hotter and water becomes more scarce in many regions, we need to think about crops and food sources that can thrive with less input. Purslane requires minimal water, no fertilizers, no pesticides, and it grows vigorously even in less than ideal conditions. It's a model of efficiency and resilience. Compare that to the resources needed to farm salmon or other omega-3 rich fish, which require either wild-caught fisheries that are often overexploited or aquaculture operations that have their own environmental challenges. Purslane just grows naturally and abundantly, with virtually no environmental cost. I'm not saying purslane should replace fish entirely in our diets, because marine omega-3s do have unique benefits, especially EPA and DHA. But I am saying that we should recognize purslane for the nutritional powerhouse it is, and stop treating it like garbage. There's something almost poetic about how we've overlooked this plant for so long, spending money on supplements and imported superfoods when something equally remarkable has been growing freely under our feet. It speaks to a broader issue about how we value things based on marketing and perception rather than actual merit. If you're ready to give purslane a try, here's what I recommend. Start by positively identifying it in your garden or finding some at a farmer's market. More and more small farms and specialty markets are carrying it now because word is getting out about its benefits. Once you have some, try it raw first in a simple salad so you can appreciate its flavor and texture without any interference. Then experiment with cooking it in different ways. Try it sautéed, try it in a soup, try it in an omelette. See what you like best. If you enjoy it, consider letting some grow in your garden intentionally or plant some seeds and have your own purslane patch. One practical tip I've learned: purslane is best harvested and eaten fresh. It doesn't store quite as long as some other greens because of its high moisture content. If you harvest a bunch, keep it in a plastic bag or container in the refrigerator and try to use it within a few days. You can also blanch and freeze purslane if you want to preserve it for later use, though it's best in cooked dishes after freezing rather than eaten raw. Some people also dry purslane, though it loses some of its appealing texture when dried. Another thing worth mentioning is that purslane is great for container gardening if you don't have a traditional garden space. It grows happily in pots on balconies, patios, or windowsills. Because it stays relatively low and spreads outward rather than upward, it works well in shallow containers. You could easily grow a continuous supply of fresh purslane on a sunny balcony, harvesting a bit here and there for your meals. It's an ideal plant for urban gardeners or anyone with limited space who wants to grow some of their own food. I think what really gets me excited about purslane is the story it tells about knowledge and value. For generations, indigenous peoples and traditional cultures knew about purslane and valued it. But modern Western culture dismissed it, literally treating it as trash. Now we're rediscovering what was always there, and we're framing it as some kind of new superfood discovery. It's not new at all. It's ancient wisdom that we forgot. And that makes me think about what else we might be overlooking or undervaluing simply because we haven't been taught to see its worth. How many other plants, practices, or ideas have we dismissed that could actually benefit us enormously if we just paid attention? The omega-3 content in purslane is scientifically validated and impressive, but it's not just about the omega-3s. It's about rethinking our relationship with the plants around us. It's about questioning assumptions and being willing to see potential where others see problems. My garden has completely transformed since I started viewing purslane as an asset rather than a nuisance. I spend less time weeding, I have a constant source of nutritious greens throughout the summer, and I've even started sharing purslane with neighbours and friends who are curious about it. It's created conversations and connections that wouldn't have happened otherwise. If you take nothing else away from this, I hope you'll at least pause the next time you see purslane growing somewhere and consider its potential instead of immediately reaching for the hoe or herbicide. Maybe taste a leaf and see what you think. Maybe let a patch grow and observe how it behaves in your garden. Maybe do a little research and learn more about its nutritional profile and culinary uses. You might be surprised at how this simple shift in perspective can open up new possibilities, not just for your garden, but for your health and your relationship with the natural world around you. I've been growing and eating purslane for a few years now, and honestly, it's become one of my favourite garden plants. Not because it's fancy or exotic, but because it's reliable, generous, and quietly amazing. It doesn't demand anything from me. It thrives in conditions where other plants struggle, and it gives back abundantly. There's something humbling about that. It reminds me that nature's gifts are often the simplest and most overlooked ones, and that real value isn't always recognized or celebrated until someone takes the time to look closer. There's another aspect of purslane that I find really compelling, and that's its role in helping us reconnect with seasonal eating. In our modern world, we're used to having every vegetable available year-round, shipped from who knows where, picked before it's ripe and stored for weeks. But purslane is different. It's a true summer plant that appears when the weather gets hot and disappears when frost comes. Learning to recognize and appreciate these seasonal rhythms has made me a better gardener and a more mindful eater. When purslane starts popping up in June, I know summer has truly arrived, and I get excited about those first fresh harvests. When it dies back in fall, I appreciate what it gave me and look forward to its return next year. There's something deeply satisfying about eating with the seasons and letting nature dictate what's on your plate, rather than grocery store supply chains. I want to share one more story that really illustrates how perceptions are changing around purslane. Last summer, I attended a garden tour where local gardeners opened their spaces to the public, and one woman named Margaret had the most beautiful edible landscape I'd ever seen. Instead of traditional ornamental plants, she'd filled her front yard with productive edibles arranged in aesthetically pleasing ways. Right at the front border, she had a flowing wave of purslane with its reddish stems and green leaves creating this gorgeous ground cover. People kept asking her what it was, and when she told them it was purslane, you could see the surprise on their faces. Many admitted they'd been pulling it out of their own gardens for years. Margaret explained how she'd let it naturalize in certain areas while keeping other sections clear for different crops, and how it had actually improved her garden's overall health by keeping the soil covered and moist. She handed out recipe cards featuring purslane dishes, and by the end of the tour, several people were asking if they could harvest some to take home and try. What Margaret's garden demonstrated is that purslane doesn't have to be hidden away or treated apologetically. It can be part of an intentional, beautiful landscape design. The contrast between the green, succulent leaves and reddish stems is actually quite attractive, especially when the tiny yellow flowers open up in the morning sun. I've started using purslane as an edging plant along my garden paths, and it creates a lovely, soft border that I can harvest from regularly. It stays low, doesn't need trimming, and handles foot traffic surprisingly well if someone accidentally steps on it. When visitors ask about my garden, the purslane always becomes a conversation starter, and I love seeing people's reactions when they learn about its nutritional value. For those of you interested in the science side of things, researchers have been studying purslane more seriously in recent years, and what they're finding is fascinating. Beyond the omega-3 content, studies have looked at purslane's potential benefits for managing blood sugar levels, its antioxidant properties, and even its possible role in supporting cardiovascular health. Some research suggests that the betalain pigments in purslane, which give it that slightly reddish color, have anti-inflammatory properties. Other studies have examined how purslane accumulates certain minerals from the soil, making it a good source of magnesium and potassium. None of this is medical advice, of course, but it's exciting to see scientific validation for what traditional cultures have known for centuries. The plant that grows abundantly and freely happens to be genuinely beneficial for human health in multiple ways. I've also noticed that growing purslane has made me more observant of other overlooked plants in my area. Once you start questioning why one plant is considered a weed and another is considered valuable, you begin to see the arbitrary nature of those classifications. I've discovered that dandelions are entirely edible and nutritious, that lamb's quarters are sometimes called wild spinach and have excellent flavor, and that clover fixes nitrogen in the soil while providing food for pollinators. My whole approach to garden management has shifted from trying to eliminate unwanted plants to understanding what each plant offers and making conscious decisions about what to keep, what to harvest, and what to remove. This perspective has made gardening less of a battle and more of a collaboration with nature. Before I wrap this up, I want to encourage you to think about purslane as just one example of a larger principle. We live in a world that's constantly telling us we need to buy more, that solutions to our problems come from far away or cost a lot of money, that expertise belongs only to professionals or corporations. But purslane teaches us that sometimes the most valuable things are free, abundant, and right under our noses. Sometimes the solution is simpler than we think. Sometimes we already have what we need and we just haven't recognized it yet. Whether it's purslane in your garden, skills you've underestimated in yourself, or resources in your community that you've overlooked, I think there's real power in learning to see value where others see nothing. So go out there, find some purslane, taste it, grow it, and let it remind you that the world is full of hidden gifts waiting to be discovered. Thanks for spending this time with me today, and I'll see you in the next video here on Botanic Haven.